On a cold Tuesday morning in March of 1989, a 16-year-old girl stood alone in her grandfather's equipment shed in Grundy County, Iowa, and made a decision that would quietly reshape her entire life. The chainsaw in her hands had just died. Her father's old Husqvarna 61, the one her grandfather had used to cut timber on this land for nearly 2 decades, had seized up somewhere between the carburetor and the crankshaft. Her father was in town. The trees behind the north pasture were waiting. And she had exactly $40 in her coat pocket. 0 mechanical training, and 11 cedar trees to bring down before nightfall. Her name was Ellie Vandermeer. She had no way of knowing that upstairs, in her grandmother's closet, a small cherry wood box had been sitting on the top shelf for 46 years, waiting for her. Waiting for the exact girl who would finally be ready to open it. What she would do next over the following 26 years would leave every man in that county rethinking everything he thought he knew about a woman's place in the world. She would be laughed at in the county co-op by a man twice her age. She would be told to go home and help her grandmother with the cooking. She would lose her biggest contract in a single afternoon because a buyer discovered her real name. And she would keep going, quietly, without arguing, without ever raising her voice. This is her story. On that cold Tuesday morning in March of 1989, Ellie Vandermeer stood at the edge of her grandfather's equipment shed and watched a perfectly good day's work fall apart before it had even started. The chainsaw in her hands had gone silent. Her father's Husqvarna 61, a machine that had cut timber on Vandermeer land for 11 straight years. Seized, somewhere between the carburetor and the crankshaft. And no amount of yanking on that starter cord was going to bring it back. She pulled it anyway, once, twice, 6 times. Nothing, just the wind through the corn stubble, the soft creak of the shed door, and her own breath fogging up in the pale March light. She was 16 years old. She had $40 in her coat pocket. She had a list of trees her father needed down before spring planting. And she had exactly 0 experience rebuilding a 2-stroke engine. Her father, Henrik Vandermeer, was in town at the co-op. He would not be back before dark. The trees were not going to wait. Let me tell you about Grundy County in 1989, because you have to understand the place before you can understand the girl. Grundy County sat in the middle of Iowa like a square of black dirt God had ironed flat and handed to Dutch and German farming families 3 generations back. The county seat was Grundy Center, a town of about 2,500 people, a grain elevator, a hardware store, a diner that served the same breakfast every day of the week, and a co-op where men gathered on Tuesday mornings to talk about seed prices and diesel costs and whatever piece of machinery had broken down since the last time they met. The Vandermeer family had been farming this ground since 1919. They did not throw things away. That last part matters, because the entire story you are about to hear turns on that one habit, a habit Henrik Vandermeer had inherited from his own father, a man named Cornelius Vandermeer, who had survived the Depression by refusing to let anything leave his property that still had a use inside it. Cornelius had built the lean-to-shed behind the main barn in 1938, and he had filled it, over the course of 40 years, with every broken tool, every cracked implement, every seized engine, every bent frame the farm had ever produced. Not as junk, as inventory. There was a difference, and Cornelius had explained it to Henrik. And Henrik had explained it to Ellie, in almost exactly the same words. Junk is something you can't fix. Everything else is just something you haven't fixed yet. By 1989, the lean-to-shed had grown into a structure the size of a 2-car garage, stacked floor to ceiling with machinery in various states of disassembly. And Ellie Vandermeer had spent most of her childhood inside it. She knew that shed the way other girls knew their friends' phone numbers. She knew which shelf held the magneto from the 1962 Sawmill that had thrown a rod the year Nixon resigned. She knew where her grandfather had stored the drive chain from a corn picker that had not run since Kennedy was president. She knew the smell of the place. Old grease, iron, and that particular sweetness of rust that has been sitting undisturbed for a very long time. And she found it more interesting than almost anything else in the world. Her grandmother said Ellie had grease in her blood instead of plasma. Her father said nothing, which in Henrik Vandermeer's vocabulary was the highest form of agreement. So when the Husqvarna gave up on her, that Tuesday morning in March, Ellie did not panic. She carried the saw into the shed, set it on the workbench, and started taking it apart. She had never rebuilt a two-stroke engine, but she had read every issue of Small Engine Repair illustrated the Grundy Center Public Library carried. And she had spent enough years in that shed to understand the basic principle her grandfather had taught her. If you know how a thing was put together, you can figure out why it came apart. 3 hours later, with the carburetor cleaned, the crankshaft seals replaced, from a parts bin her grandfather had labeled in 1974. And the air filter cleared of a wasp nest that had apparently been living there since the previous summer. The Husqvarna started on the third pull. Ellie cut down 11 cedar trees that afternoon. She did not tell her father what had happened. Henrik found out anyway. Fathers always do. His response, delivered at the dinner table that evening without looking up from his plate, was 3 words. "Good work today." That was it. That was the whole speech. But her grandmother heard it. And her grandmother watched Ellie's face while Henrik said it. And her grandmother put down her fork very slowly, and she looked at her granddaughter across the table, with an expression Ellie had never seen before, like Ruth Vandermeer was seeing a ghost. Or a memory, or maybe just her own reflection. 46 years too late. After supper, Ruth stood up from the table, walked into her bedroom, and came back holding a small wooden box. It was carved from cherry, dark with age, roughly the size of a family Bible. Ellie had seen it 100 times sitting on the top shelf of her grandmother's closet. She had asked about it once when she was 8 years old, and her grandmother had said, "That's for when you're older, sweetheart." And Ellie had forgotten about it, the way children forget things adults promise them. Ruth set the box down on the kitchen table, in front of Ellie. She did not sit back down. She said, "Open it." Ellie looked at her father. Henrik was staring at the box like he had never seen it before either, which he probably had not. Ellie opened the box. Inside was a piece of paper, yellowed, folded twice. Beneath it, a black and white photograph. And beneath that, a small silver pin, shaped like a gear. Ellie unfolded the paper first. It was a diploma. Iowa State College, Bachelor of Science, Mechanical Engineering, awarded to Ruth Elizabeth Vandermeer. May 27, 1943. Ellie read it twice, then a third time. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." "You went to college?" "I did." "For engineering?" "I did. Nobody ever told me." "No." "Why?" Ruth Vandermeer was 68 years old. She had raised 3 children in this farmhouse. She had buried a daughter, Ellie's mother, 8 years ago, when the cancer took her. She had made 10,000 suppers, baked 10,000 pies, sat through 10,000 Sunday services at First Reformed Church down the road. And in all of those years she had never once mentioned that she had graduated from Iowa State with an engineering degree. She looked at her granddaughter across the kitchen table. And she said very quietly, "Because after I married your grandfather in 1946, I was not allowed to work. Not because he said so. He never said so. But because that was the rule. Married women did not hold engineering positions in this country. Not then. And by the time the rule loosened up, I had 3 children, and a farm, and nobody who remembered I could read a schematic." She paused. She looked at the box on the table. "I have been waiting 46 years to give this to somebody who actually needed it." She reached across the table, and she picked up the small silver pin, shaped like a gear, and she pressed it into Ellie's palm. She said, "I think that's you, sweetheart." Ellie did not cry, not right away. She sat there with the pin in her hand, and the diploma on the table, and the photograph of a young woman she did not recognize but somehow did. standing on the steps of Marston Hall at Iowa State College in the spring of 1943. Ellie looked at her grandmother, and her grandmother said the sentence that Ellie would carry with her for the rest of her life. Don't ever let anybody tell you a woman's hands can't build the world. That is where the story really begins. Ellie started reading her grandmother's engineering textbooks that winter. Ruth had kept them, all of them, in 3 cardboard boxes at the back of the pantry. Machine design, thermodynamics, metallurgy. A worn copy of Mark's Standard Handbook for Mechanical Engineers, printed in 1930, with Ruth's handwriting in the margins in pencil. Ellie read them in the evenings, at the kitchen table, after supper, with a glass of milk and a piece of Ruth's apple pie beside her, and her grandmother sitting across from her, not saying anything, just sitting, sometimes knitting, sometimes just watching Ellie read. The Grundy Center Public Library did not have engineering books, but the librarian, a small sharp woman in her mid-60s named Margaret Ostlund, had noticed Ellie coming in every Saturday afternoon looking through the science section for something the library did not carry. One Saturday in February, Margaret Ostlund walked over to the table where Ellie was sitting. "What are you actually looking for, dear?" Ellie looked up. "Something about portable sawmills, ma'am." Margaret Ostlund did not blink. "How old are you?" 16. "And you want to read about portable sawmills?" "Yes, ma'am." Margaret Ostlund was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Give me 2 weeks." 10 days later, a padded envelope arrived at the library addressed to Ellie Vandermeer, in care of Margaret Ostlund. Inside were 3 books borrowed on interlibrary loan from the Iowa State University Library in Ames. Portable sawmill design, hardwood lumber grading, the economics of small-scale timber operations. There was also a note, handwritten, on library letterhead, "Return when you're finished, and come see me on Saturday, M. Ostlund." Ellie went to see her on Saturday. Margaret Ostlund brought her back to the librarian's office, closed the door, sat down behind a desk stacked with card catalog trays. "Your grandmother is Ruth Vandermeer, isn't she?" "Yes, ma'am." Margaret Ostlund nodded slowly. "I thought so. I remembered her name." She reached into the bottom drawer of her desk and pulled out a manila folder. She set it on the desk between them. "Ruth and I were classmates at Iowa State, 1939 to 1943. I studied forestry. She studied mechanical engineering. There were maybe 11 of us across all the technical programs. Women, we knew each other. Not friends exactly, but you knew every face." She paused. "I graduated in June of 1943. I took a job with the State Forestry Service. I held it for 6 weeks. Then my mother got sick, and I came home to Grundy Center to take care of her. And after she died, I could not get another forestry position. Nobody was hiring women anymore. The war was over. The men were home. That was the end of that." She looked at Ellie across the desk. "I have been a librarian in this town for 42 years. She slid the manila folder across the desk. "That folder contains the names and addresses of 15 furniture makers and specialty lumber buyers in the Midwest. I've been keeping the list current since 1968, adding new ones, crossing out the ones who go out of business. I don't know why I've been keeping it. I never had anyone to give it to, until now." Ellie opened the folder. 15 typed pages, 21 years of notes, in Margaret Ostlund's small, neat handwriting. Ellie looked up. Margaret Ostlund said, "Your grandmother and I were told, very politely, very consistently, that the world was not ready for us, and so we let it not be ready." She paused. "You are not going to make the same mistake we did, are you, dear?" Ellie could not answer. Her throat had closed up. Margaret Ostlund understood. She simply nodded and said, "Bring the books back when you're finished. Take your time." Ellie drove home from the library that afternoon with the folder on the seat beside her, and she pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of Highway 175, about a mile outside town. And she sat there, and she cried, for about 20 minutes. Not from sadness, from something else, the feeling of a door opening, that she had not even known was there. She spent the spring of 1989 walking the Vandermeer land, all 640 acres of it, with a notebook, and a tape measure, and a pencil sharpened down to a nub. She measured every hardwood tree, over 18 inches in diameter. Species, diameter, location, approximate age. By August she had cataloged over 2,000 hardwood trees across 7 neighboring farms. Walnut, cherry, silver maple, hard maple, red oak, white oak, butternut, hickory. Trees that were, by the reckoning of everyone in Grundy County, either firewood, or fence row nuisance, or too much trouble to bother with. Ellie did the math. At retail figured hardwood prices, the standing timber on the 7 farms she had walked was worth, conservatively, between $1.4 and $2.1 million. She wrote that number down on her yellow legal pad, in pencil, and she stared at it for a long time. Then she erased it, because writing a number like that down felt like tempting God. But she remembered it. She remembered every digit. The maple came down in a windstorm in early September. A silver maple, standing at the corner of the north pasture, 34 inches across at the base. The trunk had been there since before Cornelius Vandermeer bought the land. Henrik took one look at it lying across his fence line and said the words Ellie had been waiting to hear. "Well, that's firewood." Ellie said, "Dad, wait." Henrik waited. "Give me a week with it. Just 1 week." Henrik looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then he did what Henrik Vandermeer had done all her life whenever she asked him for something that seemed strange but harmless. 1 week, and he walked away. Ellie cut a single slab off the base of that trunk, 2 inches thick, 32 inches wide. She dragged it into the shed on a sheet of plywood, set it up on sawhorses, and she stood back. The grain in that slab was something she had never seen before. The wood had a shimmer to it, when the light hit it from the doorway. Like water, like the surface of a pond, when the wind changes direction. What the old-timers called curly maple. What the furniture makers called fiddleback. Ellie stood in that shed and looked at that slab for almost an hour, and she started to think. Now let me pause here, because I want you to feel what happened next. Ellie Vandermeer decided she was going to build a sawmill. Not buy one. She could not afford one. A new portable band sawmill in 1989 cost between $8,000 and $10,000. Ellie had $412 saved up. She was going to build one, from what she had, which was one lean-to shed full of broken machinery. And a grandfather who had never thrown anything away. And a grandmother with an engineering degree from 1943, and a notebook full of ideas that had been forming in her head since she was 14 years old. She spent 3 weeks working out the design on her yellow legal pad, Ruth sitting across from her every evening, not saying anything, just there. Once, near the end of the 2nd week, Ruth leaned over, looked at a page of drawings, and pointed to a coupling Ellie had sketched between 2 engines. "That won't hold. The torque will shear the bolt." Ellie looked at her grandmother. "Cross-brace it. 2 bolts at 90 degrees. Trust me." Ellie changed the drawing. That was the whole conversation. It was a Tuesday morning in October of 1989. Ellie Vandermeer was 17 years old. She had turned 17 the week before. She walked into the Grundy County Farm Bureau Co-op at 7:45 in the morning, wearing her father's canvas work jacket, carrying that slab of curly maple under her right arm. The slab weighed almost 30 pounds. She had wrapped it in an old bedsheet. There were 6 men at the counter that morning. She would remember the number for the rest of her life. Warren Holbrook was standing behind the counter. He was the co-op manager. He had been the co-op manager for 19 years. He was 61 years old. He was a large man with a large voice, and the particular confidence of somebody who had been the most knowledgeable person in every room he had ever walked into for the last 2 decades. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had confused being consistently right with being incapable of being wrong. Warren looked up when Ellie walked in. Well, look what the wind blew in. Henrik's little girl. The other men at the counter turned to look. Ellie set the slab down on the counter, slowly, and she unwrapped the bedsheet. Mr. Holbrook, I'd like to ask your opinion on something. Warren looked at the slab. His expression changed. For just a second. He was too experienced to hide it entirely. He knew what he was looking at. But then his expression closed back up. And he laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. That is important. It was the laugh of a man who believed he was doing somebody a favor. Where'd you find this, sweetheart? Pretty piece of wood. Off a silver maple on our north pasture. Well, that'll make a nice tabletop for somebody. Assuming you can find a mill to cut the rest of the log. I was thinking I'd cut it myself. The other men at the counter went very quiet. Warren stopped smiling. You'd cut it yourself? Yes, sir. With what? I'm going to build a mill. Warren looked at the men on either side of the counter. Then he looked back at Ellie, and he laughed again, louder this time. Honey, listen to me. I'm going to tell you 3 things. Because your daddy is a friend of mine. Yes, sir. First, a portable sawmill costs $8,000. Minimum. Nobody has that kind of money. Yes, sir. Second, the hardwood market is a volume market. You can't do that as a one-person operation. Yes, sir. Third, and this is the important one, honey, you go home. You help your grandmother with the cooking. You finish up your senior year. And you think about maybe going down to the community college in Marshalltown to study something practical. Bookkeeping maybe, cosmetology, something a young lady can actually build a life on. The shed went very quiet. Ellie stood there. She did not turn red. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply reached out, very quietly, and she rewrapped the slab in the bedsheet. And she picked it up. And she tucked it back under her right arm. Thank you for your time, Mr. Holbrook. And she walked out. The doorbell rang behind her. Ellie drove straight to the Grundy Center Public Library. She did not cry. She parked her father's pickup truck in the library parking lot at 8:12 in the morning. And she walked inside. And she went to the librarian's desk. Margaret Ostlund looked up. How did it go, dear? About like you'd expect. Margaret Ostlund nodded. Well then. She reached under the desk. And she pulled out a fresh legal pad. Yellow. Unopened. Still wrapped in plastic. And she slid it across the desk. You'll need this. For your list. My list. Everybody who tells you it can't be done. You write their names down. Not to hold a grudge. Just so you'll know later who to thank. Because when this works, dear, and it will work, those are the people you'll owe the most to. They gave you your reason. Ellie took the legal pad. She sold the maple slab in Waterloo 3 days later. To a furniture maker named David Hendricks. For $75. David Hendricks took one look at the slab. Ran his hand across the grain. Whistled softly. Where'd you get this, kid? My family's farm. You got any more like it? I might. Well, when you do, you call me. First. Before anybody else. Yes, sir. She drove home with $75 in her coat pocket and a business card in her jacket pocket. And she added David Hendricks's name to the front of Margaret Ostlund's folder. The folder had a first entry now. She was going to fill the rest. That winter she started collecting chainsaws. Not buying them, asking for them, politely, from every farmer she knew. By Christmas of 1989 Ellie had collected 16 dead chainsaws. By February of 1990 she had 8 of them running. By April she had rebuilt 4 more. By June she had 22 chainsaws in working order sitting in her grandfather's shed. Henrik walked into the shed one morning in early June. Ellie. Yes, Dad. What are you going to do with all these saws? I'm going to make them run a mill. He looked at her for a long moment. All right. and he walked back out to the barn. Ruth was standing at the shed door when he passed her. "Henrik." "Yes, Ma. You raised her right." Henrik Vandermeer cried for just a moment, standing in the barn doorway, with his back to his mother, so she couldn't see. She saw anyway. She always did. The mill took Ellie all summer to build. She finished it on the last Sunday of August, 1990. She was 17 years old. The total material cost of the mill came to $412.18. The first log she ran through it was the silver maple. Cornelius Vandermeer had never gotten around to bucking it up for firewood, which Ellie now understood was because Cornelius had been saving it for her, without knowing he was saving it. Henrik was in the shed. Ruth was in the shed, sitting on a folding chair. Margaret Ostlund was in the shed, wearing a dress. The engines started on the first pull. Both of them, together. The sound they made was terrible. Ellie fed the log onto the carriage, started the carriage moving, into the blade. The blade bit into the wood. And then it kept biting, and a slab peeled away from the log, 2 inches thick, 28 inches wide, falling into her father's waiting hands. Henrik held the slab up. Ruth stood up from her chair. Margaret Ostlund covered her mouth with her hand. Henrik set the slab down on the workbench. "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to sell it." "How much?" "I think maybe $140 for that slab alone." "Ha!" Which in Henrik Vandermeer's vocabulary was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Ruth walked over to her granddaughter, reached up, and pinned the small silver gear-shaped pin to the collar of Ellie's canvas jacket. "There. Now you're a proper engineer." "Grandma, I don't have the degree." "Sweetheart, I have watched you build a working sawmill out of a shed full of junk. In one summer, when you were 17 years old, with no formal training, and 2 dead engines nobody else could figure out how to bring back to life." She paused. "You have the degree. It's just written in a different language." She patted the pin on Ellie's collar, twice, very softly. Then she turned and walked out of the shed. By 1991, Ellie Vandermeer was 18 years old. She had graduated from Grundy Center High School the previous spring, turned down a partial scholarship to study business at the community college in Marshalltown, and spent the summer improving the mill. She had added a log deck, rollers. She had rebuilt the carriage drive with a salvaged hydraulic pump. She had built a solar lumber kiln behind the shed, from glass panels her father had salvaged from an old porch. Ruth walked out to look at it one afternoon in late September. Wearing her Sunday coat, she looked at the kiln. She looked at her granddaughter. "Where did you get the fan?" "Off a junked Ford Fairlane." "And the battery?" "Same car." "And the wind wheel?" "Bicycle rim from behind the barn." Ruth stood there for a long moment. "Your grandfather would have loved this." "I know." They stood together, in the cold September light. "I miss him." "Me too, Grandma." That was the whole conversation. But it was one of those conversations that stays with you. In October of 1991, Ellie made the phone call that changed everything. She had noticed an ad. Garrison Woodworks, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, was placing an ad. Back pages of the Iowa Forestry Association newsletter, looking for a supplier of figured hardwood. Ellie called them on a Monday morning. From the kitchen phone, she used her initial. "This is E. Vandermeer. I'm responding to your ad." A man's voice on the other end, middle-aged, distracted. "E. Vandermeer. E as in what?" "Just E." "All right. What can I do for you, Mr. Vandermeer?" She did not correct him. "I'd like to send you a sample of what I'm cutting." "Sample of what?" "Figured walnut. Figured hard maple. Both fiddleback. Both kiln-dried to 8% moisture." A pause. "How much can you produce a month?" She thought about her mill, her kiln, her 22 chainsaws. 1,500 board feet minimum. More if you need it. Another pause. "Send me the samples. My name is Robert Preston. I'm the buyer." Ellie sent the samples Wednesday. UPS overnight. Robert Preston called back Friday. Ellie Vandermeer. Yes. I've been in this business 22 years. I have never seen figure like this out of the Midwest. Where did you get this? My family's farm. How much can you deliver in November? 500 board feet of each. Make it 1,000. Each. $9.80 a foot for the walnut. $7.20 for the maple. 2-year contract. I'll fax the paperwork Monday. Ellie held the phone. Yes, sir. She hung up. She stood in the kitchen. She looked at her father. She looked at her grandmother. I think I just made a contract. Ruth set down the dish towel. Henrik walked across the kitchen to his daughter, and he did something he had not done since she was 7 years old. He hugged her tight for a long moment. Your mother would have been proud. Ellie's mother had been dead for 11 years. That was the second time Ellie cried that year. Her gross revenue in 1991 was $74,000. Her net was $48,000. She was 19 years old. Word travels in a small county, but it travels on its own schedule. The men noticed when Ellie paid off her father's tractor loan in cash. In December, 6 years early, they noticed when Henrik ordered a new grain drill and paid for it in full. They noticed when Ellie hired the Rasmussen boy part-time and paid him $9 an hour. They noticed. They just did not talk about it. But somebody was noticing, and somebody was worried. Warren Holbrook. He needed to do something, but he could not be seen doing something. So he sent somebody else. Let me tell you about Silas Rennick. Silas Rennick was 21 years old in the spring of 1992. He had just graduated from Iowa State University with a bachelor's degree in agricultural engineering. Top of his class. He was the son of Warren Holbrook's oldest friend, a dairy farmer named Elias Rennick, who had died of a heart attack 2 years earlier. He was tall, lean, serious, a little bit vain about his education. Warren invited him over for coffee on a Wednesday afternoon in March. Silas, I need a favor. Anything, Mr. Holbrook. There's a young lady in this county, Ellie Vandermeer, Henrik's daughter. She's running a sawmill out of her father's shed. She thinks she's building a business. I've heard. She's not. She's playing. And sooner or later she is going to hurt her father financially. And I owe Henrik better than that. Warren was very good at this. He had done it his whole career. He was building a case slowly. I need somebody with real engineering credentials to go out there. Take a look at what she's built. Write me an honest report. Why me? Warren smiled. Because you're the only person in this county with the training to understand what you're looking at. Silas felt flattered. Silas was 21 years old. Flattery worked on him. He agreed. He drove out to the Vandermeer farm on a Thursday morning in early April. Pressed shirt, khaki pants, his college jacket with the ISU logo on the breast. He had a clipboard. He knocked on the door of the equipment shed. The door was already open. Nobody answered because nobody could hear him over the mill. He stood in the doorway, and he watched, for about 6 minutes. He watched a 19-year-old woman in canvas coveralls guide a 20-inch walnut log through a bandsaw powered by 2 Husqvarna chainsaw engines running on a common drive shaft. He watched the carriage travel smoothly along a track made of salvaged fence posts. He watched the slab come off clean and true, and in 6 minutes he saw something that 4 years of engineering school had not prepared him to see. He saw a functioning industrial operation, built out of what most of his classmates would have called garbage. He waited until she shut the engines off. Then he cleared his throat. Ellie turned around. She looked at him. Clipboard, iron shirt, ISU jacket. Can I help you? I'm Silas Rennick. Mr. Holbrook at the co-op sent me. Ellie looked at him for a long moment. She did not smile. Did he now? Yes. Take your look. She turned back to the mill. For 45 minutes Silas measured things. Wrote things down. Inspected the drive shaft coupling. Examined the venting system on the kiln. Looked at the organized parts wall. The whole time Ellie kept working. Never looked at him. never spoke to him. When he was done, he stood at the doorway. "Miss Vandermeer." She stopped the mill, turned around. "Your carriage drive coupling is under-engineered for the torque loads you're running." I calculated approximately 17% over rated capacity. Ellie looked at him. "You calculated that in your head?" "I did. Off eyeballing my mill for 45 minutes. Yes." Ellie walked over to the workbench, opened a drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad, flipped through 3 pages, stopped on one, turned it so Silas could see. "I ran the same calculation on paper 18 months ago. 19%. That's why I cross-braced the coupling, and added a set screw, and doubled the diameter of the drive shaft, and spec'd the whole assembly for 200% nominal load." She paused. "Would you like to check my math?" Silas looked at the drawing. The math was correct. The engineering was, in fact, more conservative than he would have designed it himself. He looked up at her. "Where did you learn to do this?" "My grandmother. Iowa State. Class of 1943. Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Miss Vandermeer, I owe you an apology." "I don't need an apology, Mr. Rennick. I need you to go back to Warren Holbrook and tell him whatever it is he sent you to tell him, and then we can all get on with our lives." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because whatever I write in this report is going to be the truth. And the truth is that your operation is professionally engineered, undercapitalized, and running well within its safety margins." "Then write that." "He won't publish it. He'll just throw it away." "That is not my problem." She turned back to the mill. She started it up. He was dismissed. Silas Rennick drove back to Grundy Center, wrote a 3-page report, drove to Warren Holbrook's house, handed it to him, and left. Warren read the first page. Then he tore all 3 pages in half and put them in his fireplace. But something else was happening. Something Warren could not tear up. Silas Rennick was thinking. He was thinking about a 19-year-old woman who had done in a farm shed what most engineers, with 50 times her budget, could not do. He was thinking about her grandmother, class of 1943, and he was thinking about the way Ellie Vandermeer had looked at him, like she had already met 100 men just like him, and was already tired of the conversation. 2 weeks later, he drove back out to the Vandermeer farm. Without an appointment, Ellie was in the shed, adjusting the tension on a bandsaw blade. She looked up. "Mr. Rennick." "Miss Vandermeer. I thought we were done." "So did I." He walked over to the workbench. He set down a small paper bag, grease-stained. "I brought coffee and apple fritters." Ellie stared at the bag. "Why?" "Because I gave your operation a lot of unsolicited advice 2 weeks ago. And I did not thank you for your time, and I would like to correct that today, if that's all right with you." Ellie was quiet. "You drove out here to buy me a fritter." "I did." She sighed. "The fritter better be fresh." "I asked. Came out of the oven this morning." They sat on the tailgate of her father's pickup for 40 minutes. Silas did most of the talking. He told her about growing up on the dairy farm, about his father dying 2 years earlier, about his mother alone in the farmhouse, about feeling stuck between the world he came from and the world he had trained for. Ellie listened. When he was done, she said, "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you." Losing a parent when you're young, that is a specific kind of quiet you have to learn to live inside. He looked at her. "Your mother. Cancer. I was 8. They sat there. "May I ask you something, Ellie?" "You may. Do you need any help at the mill as you grow?" She looked at him for a long time. "I don't need a partner, Mr. Rennick. I don't need a face man. I don't need a husband. I don't need a college boy who can't decide whether he's a farmer or an engineer. Silas, I need somebody who will show up on time, do what I ask, not question me in front of clients, and go home at the end of the day without expecting me to feel grateful. That I can do. Prove it." "How?" "Show up Monday, 6 a.m. Bring gloves." Do not wear that jacket. He showed up Monday at 5:45, wearing a plain canvas jacket, old gloves, steel-toed boots, standing at the shed door in the dark, with a thermos of coffee. Ellie walked out of the farmhouse at 6. She looked at him. You're early. Yes. Don't be early again. It's presumptuous. Understood. She almost smiled. She turned away before he could catch it. But he caught it. He worked at the mill for the next 18 months. Not as a partner. As labor. He moved logs. He stacked lumber. He loaded pickup trucks bound for Cedar Rapids and Waterloo and Minneapolis. He shoveled sawdust. He cleaned blades. He did every job Ellie gave him. Without question. Without complaint. And in the evenings, when the work was done, he sat at the Vandermeer kitchen table and drank coffee and listened to Ruth Vandermeer talk about mechanical engineering in 1943. Ruth loved him. Immediately. Completely. Ellie sat at the other end of the table, pretending to read the Grundy County Herald, watching Silas out of the corner of her eye. The way he thanked her grandmother for the coffee, every single time. The way he never took off his boots at the door without asking first. The way he did not fill silences. She started to think. But she did not think out loud. Now let me tell you about April of 1993. Because April of 1993 is when the story took the turn that almost broke Ellie. Robert Preston announced he was coming to visit the operation, in person, on a Tuesday, to evaluate expanding the contract. Ellie was excited. Preston was talking about doubling the contract. She spent 3 days cleaning the shed. Ruth baked pecan bars for the visit. Robert Preston arrived on Tuesday at 10 in the morning. He drove a Cadillac, suit and tie, wingtip shoes covered in mud, from the farm lane. Ellie met him at the shed door. Mr. Preston, welcome. I'm Ellie Vandermeer. Robert Preston stopped walking. He looked at her. He looked past her, into the shed, where Silas was moving a walnut log onto the deck. He looked back at her. You are E. Vandermeer. Yes, sir. You're a woman. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. How old are you? 20. Robert Preston did not come inside the shed. He stood in the muddy farm lane, wingtip shoes ruined. I'm sorry, Miss Vandermeer. This is not going to work. Sir, my clients are high-end furniture retailers, Restoration Hardware, Ethan Allen, Bloomingdale's. They will not buy hardwood from a 20-year-old girl running a chainsaw operation in an Iowa cornfield. I don't care how good the wood is. I care how the story sells. And your story does not sell. Sir, the wood is the same. The mill is the same. My name did not change. You lied to me on the phone. I used my initial. That is not lying. It is by omission. And you know it. Ellie stood there. I am invoking the 60-day termination clause on our contract. Effective today. I'll pay for what you've already delivered. Nothing more. He turned around. He walked to his Cadillac. He drove away. 60% of Ellie Vandermeer's revenue drove down the farm lane in a spray of mud and gravel and disappeared. Ellie stood in the doorway of the shed. She could not move. Silas walked out of the shed. Ellie. She did not answer. Henrik reached them. Ellie, what happened? He canceled the contract. Why? Because I have a woman's name. Henrik was quiet for a very long moment. Then he said, quietly, damn him, which was the first curse word Ellie had ever heard her father say. In her entire life. She turned and walked into the shed. She sat down on an overturned bucket, and she cried. Silas did not go in. Henrik did not go in. Ruth walked out from the kitchen, down the porch steps, across the yard, into the shed. She sat down on a second bucket next to her granddaughter. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, Ellie. Yes, Grandma. In 1945, I was offered a position at John Deere in Waterloo, designing tractor transmissions. I was engaged to your grandfather. He said if I took the job, we would have to postpone the wedding. because he needed a wife on the farm, not a woman driving to Waterloo every morning. Ellie looked at her grandmother. I turned down the job. I married him. I never regretted marrying him, but I regretted turning down the job. Every single day. For 48 years. She paused. Do you know why I regretted it, sweetheart? Ellie shook her head. Because I let a man decide what I was worth. And once you let one man do that, it becomes easier to let the next one, and the next, and the next, until you cannot remember what you were worth to begin with. She reached over, and she took Ellie's hand. You lost one contract, not the business. Now go find the next one. Ellie sat there for another minute. Then she stood up. She wiped her face on her sleeve. She walked into the house. To the phone. She pulled out Margaret Ostlund's folder. 21 years of names. And she started making calls. She got a yes on the 5th call. Hallstrom Fine Woodworks. Minneapolis. A woman answered the phone. 55 years old. Swedish accent. Her name was Ingrid Hallstrom. She had founded the company in 1978. Ellie explained. The contract, the buyer, the mill. Ingrid Hallstrom listened. Then Ingrid Hallstrom said, Miss Vandermeer, you are going to send me samples. Overnight. Tomorrow. If they are what you say they are. I will double what Preston was paying you. And I will send my truck to pick up the first shipment personally. Next Friday. You will pay double. Yes. Why? Because I have been building fine furniture in this country for 28 years. And every buyer I have ever met has told me a woman cannot run a woodshop. I am not going to be the person who does that to you. When Preston fires you. I am going to be the person who catches you. Ellie closed her eyes. Thank you. Do not thank me. Send the samples. Ellie sent the samples. Ingrid Hallstrom paid double. Hallstrom Fine Woodworks became Vandermeer Hardwood's anchor client for the next 22 years. The winter of 1993 was long. Ruth's cough started in October. Slow at first. Nothing anyone thought much about. By Thanksgiving it was worse. By Christmas Ruth could not climb the stairs to her bedroom without stopping to rest. The tests came back on a Monday. Lung cancer. Stage 4. The prognosis was months. Ellie drove her grandmother home from Iowa City on a Wednesday. Ruth was looking out the window at the fields. Well, that is that. Grandma, sweetheart, do not spend the time we have crying. There will be time for that later. Right now I have things to say to you. Ellie kept driving, her hands very tight on the wheel. Under my bed there is a metal box. Green. Do not look for it until I am gone. There will be money in it. And a letter. Do what you want with both. Grandma, please. That boy Silas. He loves you. He has loved you since the first fritter. He will not say it because he is afraid you will say no. You are not going to say no. Because you love him too. Ellie could barely see the road. When I am gone, do not stop building. Do you understand me? Do not stop for anything. I understand. Say it. I will not stop. Ruth Vandermeer died on the 14th of March 1994. In her own bedroom. Ellie was holding her right hand. Henrik was holding her left. Silas was standing in the doorway. She was 73 years old. After the burial. After the reception. After the last casserole dish had been washed. Ellie went upstairs to her grandmother's bedroom. She reached under the bed. She pulled out a green metal box. Inside was $3,400 in cash, old bills, and a single envelope. Sweetheart, this is the money I saved from selling piano lessons in this house between 1948 and 1979. Cash. Every week. Never put in the bank because your grandfather did not know about it, and I wanted it to be mine. Use it however you want, but if you want a suggestion, use it to build the next mill. And do not forget the second thing I told you in the car. I love you, Grandma. Ellie sat on the floor of her grandmother's bedroom. Then she went downstairs. Silas was in the kitchen, washing dishes. Ellie, Silas, are you all right? No. What can I do? I need to tell you something, and I only want to say it once. He put down the dish towel. My grandmother told me before she died that you love me, and that I love you, and that I have been too stubborn to admit it to myself. She was right about most things in her life. I do not want her to be wrong about the last one she said to me. Silas did not move. Do you love me? Yes. Have you loved me for a while? Since the first fritter. Ellie almost laughed. It came out as something between a laugh and a sob. All right then. They got married in a simple ceremony in the equipment shed. On a Saturday afternoon in July of 1994. The shed had been swept clean. Chairs from First Reformed set up in rows on the concrete floor. About 40 guests. Henrik walked Ellie down the makeshift aisle. In her mother's wedding dress. Margaret Ostlund sat in the front row. In the seat where Ruth would have sat. Ingrid Hallstrom drove down from Minneapolis. Silas wore his father's suit. Slightly too large in the shoulders. Ellie wore Ruth's small silver gear-shaped pin on her lapel. Above her mother's dress. 3 generations pinned to one collar. When the marriage certificate was issued, the clerk asked what surname the bride would be using. Vandermeer. Vandermeer Rennick? Vandermeer. Just Vandermeer. Silas said, from behind Ellie, it stays her name. It has always been her name. It is going to keep being her name. 2 months later, Ellie broke ground on the second mill. The second mill went live on a cold morning in November of 1994. The first log through it was a black walnut, 51 inches across at the base. Ellie cut the base down to 47 inches so it would fit her mill. She fed it through. The slab that came off the first pass was 44 inches wide, 3 inches thick, weighed 87 pounds, and had a cathedral figure that rose and fell across the width like a range of dark hills. Silas held the slab up. Henrik walked over, looked at it for a long time. Your grandmother would have loved this one. I know. By the spring of 1997, Ellie Vandermeer was 24 years old. She was pregnant with her first child. She was running 2 sawmills, sourcing timber from 18 farm properties. She had 4 full-time employees. Her gross revenue for 1996 had been $218,000. Her net had been $141,000. And nobody in Grundy County was laughing anymore. Let me tell you about Lyle Sorensen, because Lyle's story is the story that opened the door. Lyle Sorensen was 71 years old in April of 1997. He had a farm out on the east side of the county, 240 acres of corn and soybeans, and a 40-acre woodlot at the back of the property. The woodlot had been planted by Lyle's father in 1952, 63 black walnut seedlings. Lyle had held onto them for 18 years, since his father died. But he was 71. His wife had Parkinson's. He needed cash for her care. A timber buyer from Des Moines had offered $4,200 for the entire lot, $67 per tree. Lyle had almost taken the offer. Then he had heard Ellie's name. He drove out to the Vandermeer farm on a Thursday morning. Silas met him at the shed door. I'm looking for Ellie Vandermeer. May I ask what for? I've got walnut. Silas turned and walked into the shed. Came back out a minute later with Ellie behind him. She was 7 months pregnant. Canvas overalls stretched tight across her middle. Safety glasses pushed up into her hair. Mr. Sorensen, what can I do for you? Ellie, I've got 63 walnut trees. My father planted them in 1952. A buyer from Des Moines offered me $4,200 for the lot. I want a second opinion. Before I sign anything. Diameter range, 18 to 24 inches. Mostly straight or curved. Mostly straight. My father was particular. Ellie was quiet for a moment. Silas, get the truck. We're going to Sorensen's. They walked that woodlot for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, she sat down on a fallen log. She pulled out her yellow legal pad. She did arithmetic for about 12 minutes. Then she looked up at Lyle. Mr. Sorensen, I'd like to give you 2 numbers. Then I'd like you to sit down. Lyle sat down on the log next to her. The first number is what your trees are worth. Cut for figured lumber. Kiln dried. Sold direct to furniture makers. Over the next 14 months. How much? $198,000. Lyle did not move. Say that again. $198,000. Lyle Sorensen looked at his boots, then at the trees, then at Ellie. He started to cry, not loud. Just tears running down a 71-year-old man's face. My father was going to sell them for the money that would let my mother retire. That was the plan. He died before he could. He wiped his face on his sleeve. You are telling me the trees can pay for my wife's care and put my grandchildren through college? Yes, sir. What's the second number? Your share. 30% of net. Somewhere between 52 and 58,000. Lyle Sorensen signed the agreement that afternoon. The final accounting was delivered to him in June of 1998. Net revenue on the lot. $187,400. Lyle's share. $56,220. He had been offered $4,200 for the same trees. Lyle Sorensen took the check to the First Reformed Church potluck the following Sunday. He simply set the check down on the table next to the tuna casserole. And he told the story. Once. Slowly. By the following Tuesday morning, every farmer in Grundy County knew. By the end of that summer, Ellie had signed contracts on 12 additional woodlots. Now let me tell you about the afternoon of April 14th, 1997. Ellie was in the shed, 9 months pregnant, overdue. She was sitting on a folding chair, with a clipboard, reviewing inventory, because inventory did not require standing. The door of the shed opened. Ellie looked up. It was Warren Holbrook. He was 69 years old now. His hair had gone completely white. He was wearing a Sunday coat. On a Monday afternoon, he stood in the doorway. He did not say anything. For about 30 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Warren said, "Miss Vandermeer, Mr. Holbrook, may I come in?" "You may." He walked slowly, carefully. He stopped about 6 feet from her chair. He looked around the shed, at the 2 mills, the parts wall, the rebuilt chainsaws hanging in their labeled rows, the drying stacks of lumber, Cornelius Vandermeer's original workbench, which was still there, 59 years after he had built it. He was quiet for a long time. Then Warren Holbrook did something that no one had ever seen him do. He asked permission to sit down. "May I sit? There's a bucket by the door." Warren pulled the bucket over, turned it upside down, sat down. Slowly, he put his hands on his knees. "Miss Vandermeer, I came out here today to tell you something. And I do not know how to tell it. So I am going to just start talking, and you are going to let me finish. Because if I stop, I do not think I will start again." Ellie set down her clipboard. "All right." Warren was quiet for another moment. "I had a daughter." Ellie went very still. "Her name was Diane. She was born in 1950. She was my only child." He paused. "Diane was smart. Smarter than me. Smarter than her mother. Smarter than her teachers. By the time she was 15, she was reading college physics books for fun. By the time she was 17, she was building radios in the basement. Better radios than you could buy at the Sears in Waterloo." His voice was steady, but barely. She graduated from Grundy Center High School in the spring of 1968. She was valedictorian. She had been accepted to Iowa State to study mechanical engineering. Full scholarship, merit-based. Ellie did not move. She came to me. In August, a week before she was supposed to leave for Ames, she sat down at our kitchen table, and she told me she was scared. She was afraid the boys would not like her. She was afraid her professors would not take her seriously. She wanted me to tell her she was making the right decision. He paused. I laughed at her. He looked up at Ellie. I told her engineering was not a proper field for a young woman. I told her she should go to Iowa State, but she should study elementary education, or nursing, Something practical. Something a young lady could actually build a life on. Ellie felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She had heard those words before. Almost verbatim. She had heard them from him. In 1989. She did not speak. She looked at me, across that kitchen table, for a long time, and she said, "All right, Daddy. If that is what you think, I will change my major." He shook his head. She left for Ames 3 days later. She did change her major to elementary education. I felt very proud of myself, like I had saved her from a mistake. His voice cracked, just barely. She came home for Thanksgiving. She was different, quiet. She did not laugh anymore. She went back to school Sunday afternoon. He paused. She did not come home for Christmas. She did not come home for spring break. She did not come home for the summer. She got a job in Des Moines. She sent us short formal letters. Warren's hands were shaking slightly on his knees. In September of 1969, I got a letter from her. It was 1 page. Said, "Dear Mother and Father, I have decided to transfer. I am leaving Iowa State. I do not think we should be in contact for a while. I need time. I am sorry, Diane." He was quiet. I did not hear from her again. For 29 years. Ellie could not breathe. My wife died in 1983, of a stroke. She died believing our daughter had abandoned us. She died not knowing why. He took a breath. I have known, for 29 years, exactly what I did wrong. I have known it every single day. His voice broke. I have known it every time I have looked at you. Ellie put her hand on her belly. In October of 1989, a 17-year-old girl walked into my co-op with a piece of maple. And I heard my own voice come out of my mouth, saying the same words I had said to my daughter 21 years earlier, almost verbatim. And I watched that girl walk out the door, and I told myself it was different, that you were different. He looked at her. I have been carrying that lie for 8 years. And I cannot carry it anymore, because every time you take another timber contract, every time you prove me wrong, I know a little more clearly what I did to her, and I know a little more clearly that I am going to die before I can undo it. He stopped speaking. The shed was so quiet Ellie could hear her own heartbeat. "Mr. Holbrook." "Yes. Why are you telling me this today?" "Because I did not come here to apologize to you. I came here to ask you for something." Ellie waited. "Would you teach me how to see what I did not see before I die, so I know what I missed in my daughter?" Ellie sat there for a long time. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about her mother. She thought about the baby she was carrying, which was going to be a girl. She had known from the moment she found out, without being told. She thought about Warren Holbrook, on an overturned bucket, in her equipment shed, asking a 24-year-old pregnant woman to teach him how to see. She remembered her grandfather's words. "Junk is something you can't fix. Everything else is just something you haven't fixed yet." Warren Holbrook was not junk. "Get up, Mr. Holbrook. I am going to show you the wall." They stood at the parts wall for 45 minutes. Ellie told him about every chainsaw, which farmer had brought it, when, what was wrong with it, where the parts had come from to rebuild it, what kind of tree she had cut with it. 211 chainsaws, each one with a story. Warren listened. He did not interrupt. At one point Silas walked into the shed. Saw Warren Holbrook standing at the wall next to his pregnant wife, and Silas quietly turned around and walked back out. When Ellie finished, Warren looked at her. His face was wet. He was not trying to hide it anymore. "Thank you, Miss Vandermeer. You should call me Ellie." "Thank you, Ellie." "Mr. Holbrook." "Yes, I am going to find your daughter." He looked at her. "I have tried. For years. I do not know where she is. You did not have my husband. My husband knows how to use the internet, and I know how to make phone calls. Give me 6 months." Warren stood there. "Why would you do that?" "Because my grandmother once told me that women in this country have to help each other. because nobody else is going to, and because your daughter is a woman, and she is somebody's daughter, and that means she is my problem now. Warren Holbrook wept, openly, in her equipment shed. On a Monday afternoon in April, then he wiped his face on his coat sleeve. Thank you. He walked to the shed door. He stopped. He turned around. Ellie. Yes. The name of the baby, if it is a girl. Wren. He smiled. For the first time she had ever seen. That's a good name. That is a very good name. He walked out. Ellie's daughter was born 5 days later. Wren Ruth Vandermeer Rennick. 7 pounds 4 ounces. Ruth's silver gear-shaped pin sat on the bedside table, in its cherry wood box, waiting for a granddaughter. The Tuesday morning came in September of 1997. Ellie walked into the Grundy County Farm Bureau Co-op at 7:30 in the morning. She was carrying a yellow legal pad. She was not carrying a maple slab this time. There were 9 men at the counter. Warren Holbrook was standing behind it. The conversation stopped when Ellie walked in. Good morning. Several men said good morning back. She walked up to the counter. She set the yellow legal pad down. On the top page was a table she had prepared the night before. 12 farm properties. The timber revenue each had generated through Vandermeer hardwoods between 1990 and 1997, and the comparable revenue each would have received from a commercial timber buyer. Total commercial value of the timber, $94,000. Total revenue actually generated, $612,000. The difference, $518,000. That had stayed in Grundy County. She did not say anything. The men looked at the pad for a long time. Then Warren Holbrook stepped out from behind the counter. He walked around to the front. So he was standing on the same side as Ellie. Gentlemen, I have been standing behind this counter for 27 years. And I have been wrong about a great many things. Most of them small, but one of them very large. The men were silent. In October of 1989, this young woman walked into this room, carrying a piece of maple, and I laughed at her. I told her to go home. I told her a woman could not do what she was proposing to do. He turned toward Ellie. Ellie Vandermeer. I was wrong. In front of 6 men. I was wrong. And it has taken me 8 years to say it out loud. And I owe you an apology in this same room in front of at least as many men. Ellie looked at him. She did not say anything. I am sorry. I was wrong. About you. About your mill. About your entire way of looking at what a farm woman in this county is capable of. He turned to the other men. Any farmer in this county who has walnut, or maple, or cherry, or any hardwood standing on his ground, and who is not already working with Vandermeer hardwoods, should get in his truck this afternoon and drive out to their farm, and they should ask her what their trees are worth. He paused. That is the end of my announcement. Thank you for listening. The room was silent. Then Bill Duragish, who had been at the counter that morning 8 years earlier, cleared his throat. Warren, I have been meaning to ask you about that. For a long time. Bill. Yes. You should have asked me sooner. I would have started this apology a lot earlier. Bill smiled. Yeah, well, we do what we can. Ellie picked up her legal pad. Gentlemen, if any of you would like to talk about your woodlets, I will be at the farm on Thursday afternoons for the next month. She walked out. 4 of the 9 men walked out with her. Ellie kept her promise to Warren Holbrook. Silas spent his evenings that fall in the Grundy Center Public Library. On the new Internet computer terminal. He searched. He called. He wrote letters. He hired a private investigator in Des Moines for 2 months. By December he had a name and an address. Diane Holbrook was living in Portland, Oregon. She was 47 years old. She was a senior mechanical engineer at Boeing. She had a husband named Michael Whitfield, 2 teenage children, a boy named Daniel and a girl named Grace. She had never gone back to Iowa. Silas wrote her a letter, 3 pages long. Took him a week to write. He mailed it on the 18th of December. On the 23rd of December, 5 days later, the phone rang at the Vandermeer farmhouse. Ellie answered. It was 7 in the evening. Wren was asleep in her bassinet. A woman's voice on the other end. Is this Ellie Vandermeer? Yes. My name is Diane. I received a letter from your husband. Ellie sat down at the kitchen table. Yes. I have not spoken to my father in 29 years. I do not know if I want to say anything to him. But I would like to speak with the woman my father says he sees his daughter in, before I make any decisions. Yes. May I come to Iowa for Christmas this weekend? You may. My guest room is ready. Diane flew into Des Moines on Christmas Eve. Silas picked her up at the airport. He drove her to Grundy County. 2 hours. Through empty winter fields. Diane did not speak for most of the drive. Then, about 15 minutes from the farm, she said, Silas. Yes. How does she look? Your wife. Just tell me. She's 24. She has dark hair. She has your father's eyes, which is a strange thing to say. But it's true. Diane was quiet. That is what I was afraid of. They pulled into the farm lane at 9 that night. Ellie was standing in the doorway of the farmhouse, holding Wren, wrapped in a quilt. Diane got out of the truck. Ellie walked out to meet her. They stood in the yard. In the snow, in the porch light, Diane looked at Ellie. Diane started to cry. You look like my mother. I am not your mother, Diane, but your father is a broken man. And I am the closest thing he has to a daughter right now. And I am asking you, on his behalf, and on mine, to at least hear what he has to say, before he dies. Diane wiped her face. All right. Ellie brought her inside. Ruth's silver pin was sitting on the mantel, in its cherry wood box. Diane saw it. She walked over. She opened the box. This is a gear. It is. Whose was this? My grandmother's. She was a mechanical engineer. Class of 1943. Iowa State. Diane put a hand over her mouth. I have been an engineer for 26 years. I have never met another woman engineer who came from Iowa. Not one. You have now. Diane pinned the little gear to her sweater. For that one evening. She wore it while she held Wren for the first time. She wore it while Ellie made her a cup of tea. She wore it while Silas built up the fire in the living room. Warren Holbrook rang the doorbell of the Vandermeer farmhouse at 10 o'clock on Christmas morning. Silas had called him at 9. Warren had not slept. Diane opened the door. Her father looked at her. 29 years of grief passed across his face in about 4 seconds. Diane. Daddy. They stood there. Then Diane stepped forward, and she put her arms around her father. And Warren Holbrook put his arms around his daughter. For the first time since August of 1968. They stood in the doorway of the Vandermeer farmhouse. 2 people, holding each other, crying quietly, while a Christmas turkey cooked in the oven behind them. And Wren napped in her father's arms in the living room. And Ellie stood by the kitchen counter, with her hands folded in front of her. Warren Holbrook lived for another 8 years. He worked as a volunteer mentor at the Girls' Engineering Club at Grundy Center High School, which he had personally endowed in 1998 with $100,000 from his savings. Warren died in the winter of 2005, in Diane's guest room in Portland. In his last days he asked Diane if she had forgiven him, and Diane had told him, truthfully, that forgiveness was not a single thing, that it was a series of small choices she made every day, to keep loving him, despite what he had done. In his will he left $240,000 to establish an engineering scholarship for rural Iowa girls to attend Iowa State University's College of Engineering. The scholarship was named the Diane Holbrook and Ruth Vandermeer Engineering Scholarship for Rural Iowa Women. The first recipient was awarded the scholarship in the fall of 2006. Sarah, from Franklin County. She had built her own wind turbine out of parts from a junked pickup truck. Ellie personally handed her the check. Henrik Vandermeer died in the spring of 2009. In the farmhouse, Ellie was holding his hand. Silas was standing at the foot of the bed. Ren was 12 years old, sitting on the floor beside the bed. His last words to Ellie were, "Your grandfather would be proud. Your grandmother is waiting for me. I love you, sweetheart." Margaret Ostlund died in the summer of 2011. In the Grundy Center Public Library, at her desk, she was 89 years old. The library board named the reading room in her honor. Now let me tell you about the morning that closed the third circle. Ren Ruth Vandermeer Rennick was 18 years old in the spring of 2015. She was tall, serious, dark-haired, wore her hair in a braid down her back, had her grandfather's quiet way of watching things before she spoke. She had been reading her great-grandmother's engineering textbooks since she was 11. She had been working in the mill since she was 13. She walked into the equipment shed on a Wednesday morning in April, with a notebook under her arm, and a mug of coffee her father had made her. Ellie was at the workbench, rebuilding a steel 076, which she did not need to rebuild, but which she rebuilt sometimes because it kept her hands busy while she was thinking. Ellie was 42 years old. She looked up when Ren came in. "Hi, sweetheart. Mom, I want to show you something." She set the notebook down on the workbench. She opened it. Ellie leaned over. The notebook was full of drawings. Careful, precise, a modified solar kiln design, with calculations showing how a modified airflow pattern could reduce drying time from 6 weeks to 3 to 4 weeks, which would effectively increase mill throughput by 34%, without adding any capital equipment. Ellie read through the notebook slowly. She checked the math. The math was correct. She looked up at her daughter. "Ren, when did you do this?" "Over the winter. I finished the calculations in February." "Why didn't you show me sooner?" "Because I wanted to be sure." Ellie was quiet for a moment. "Let's build the test kiln this summer." "Really? You've done the work." "We do the work. That's how it goes." Ren smiled. Then she said, "Warren Holbrook's grandson works at the co-op now. Ryan. He's in my class at school. I told him about the kiln design last week." "What did he say?" "He said solar kilns aren't efficient enough to justify modifying. He said the numbers wouldn't work at scale." Ellie looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she smiled. Slowly. "Good. That is useful information." "Why is that useful?" "Because the people who tell you it can't be done are sometimes the most useful people in the room. Sweetheart, they tell you exactly what you're going to have to prove." Ren said, "That sounds like something great-grandma would have said." "It is." Ren built the test kiln that summer. The modified airflow design reduced the drying cycle to 26 days for maple, 31 days for walnut. The throughput increase was 34%. She documented the results in her notebook, which she kept on the shelf in the equipment shed, right next to her mother's yellow legal pad from 1989, which was on the same shelf where Cornelius Vandermeer's original parts bin label from 1974 still sat, in his original handwriting. Above the shelf, framed on the wall, was Ruth Vandermeer's engineering diploma from Iowa State College. May 27, 1943. 3 generations of women. 1 shed. 1 quiet language they all spoke. The shed her great-great-grandfather Cornelius had built in 1938 was still standing, still working, still full of parts and tools and rebuilt chainsaws hanging in labeled rows. And on a small hook by the workbench, right where Cornelius had once carved a single sentence into the wood with a pocket knife. The words were still there, after 77 years. Ellie had traced them fresh in pencil the summer she was 12. Junk is something you can't fix. Everything else is just something you haven't fixed yet. Ren traced them again that summer, with her own pencil, in her own hand. The letters looked exactly the same. Ellie Vandermeer's story is not a story about a sawmill. It is a story about 3 women in 3 different decades, who were all told the same thing. that the world was not ready for them. Ruth believed it, and put her diploma in a wooden box for 46 years. Ellie did not believe it, and built an empire out of chainsaws nobody else wanted. Wren will never hear it in her lifetime, because her mother and her great-grandmother quietly broke it in half, before she ever had to carry it. This is the thing that any woman watching this story can do for the next one. Keep the diploma, keep the list, keep the faith. Wait for a granddaughter, a daughter, a stranger, anyone who needs it, to come and find it. Because no dream is ever really lost. As long as someone is still willing to walk into the shed, pick up the tools, and begin the work, and